Today on Nova Legends podcast, I want to talk about high school football. Why are there so many blowouts? And what we can do to change the situation. Namely, to go back to three classifications and to also create a super league of the top teams in the state. We have six classifications, so that is really supposed to uh, even the playing field. If the enrollments are generally the same on in a school, then you would think the football teams, um, on average, would be very similar or at least competitive. But it hasn't worked out that way. There are blowouts all over the state, and it's not just the Hayfield team in Northern Virginia that everyone's talking about. There are blowouts everywhere. More games are blowouts than are within a touchdown or two. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day. He goes to games every week, and he's yet to see a close game all year. So when you see a close game, it's a treat. I've been lucky enough to see one this year, but most of the games are one team is going to dominate. Even when the game looks close on paper, it ends up being a blowout one way or the other, which is extremely strange. So I think what it's going to do over time, you're going to have fewer kids at schools try out, especially at those schools that are getting blown out every week. You're going to have fewer schools able to put on a program. You're going to have fewer football programs throughout the state, with time. If you create what I'm calling a so-called super league, it's the top 16 teams in the state. So what you would do is from all over the state, you would take the perennial powerhouses and you would put them in the Super League. And Hayfield now, because it's Coach Overton's team, but it could be Madison, Patriot, Battlefield, and then Maury in Norfolk, um, Kings Fork, probably in Norfolk. Obviously, Phoebus, Class 4 team that's won, I think, 40 straight games. There are teams in Richmond like Manchester, maybe Liberty Christian in Lynchburg, the private school, maybe Patrick Henry or Salem in Roanoke. Um, anyway, we either create a system where you're automatically promoted when you win a state championship, or one where you can petition and teams apply to be in the Super League. I'm not sure whether teams would want to be in the Super League. I know some schools would like to be because it's a great way to keep kids away from private schools. If you're playing in this elite league where every conference game was a tough game, or would teams shirk away with it? Would they try to sandbag and be back in the other leagues? I'm not sure how that would work. My guess is you have to do some of both. Like some of it will be automatic promotion because you just won too many. Like Phoebus in Class 4. I know the school's not very big. Phoebus is in Newport News, I believe, but they obviously would be automatic promotions. But if you could petition and say, hey, look, all my players are seniors. We're going to be terrible next year. So maybe there's like a competition committee that would examine each case and will determine which teams are in the so-called Super League. I think you do 11 game regular season rather than 10, because you're going to have a postseason is going to be limited by just the teams in the Super League. Maybe just have the top two teams in each two-team division. So it's 16-team Super League with two 8-team divisions. And in the playoffs, you have the number two team in one bracket plays the number one team in the other, and vice versa. And then you have a state championship of the Super League. You have 11 regular season games because you're not going to have that many playoff games for the teams. And, the league is so tough. Every game is like a playoff game, kind of like, in the 80s when I was in school. Every game in the Northern District, I went to Robinson, was a playoff game, and only one team would advance. So it does create competition. Some challenges you're going to have right away. What are you going to do about JV teams? The JV teams play in the Super League? Well, offhand, if you have 11 games and if it's an 18 league, that means there's seven conference games. You're going to have four non-conference games. Maybe those are your JV games, and also maybe some of the Super League teams will want to play JV as well. So you can probably put together a 6 or 7 game schedule that way. No, I don't think that's going to be an issue. Maybe an issue will be the travel. If like the 8 teams districts and teams are spread out, I think in the north it won't be that bad because there's 8 teams in like north of Fredericksburg that would create a super division. They're not that far apart, but maybe in the southern part of the state, you have longer trips. You may have to have Saturday games, which probably wouldn't be the worst state in the world. I know they've had some security issues at some of the games as well. So I definitely think by playing Saturday, we can get away with that. Another challenge is what about the rivalries? If you break up these conferences, what about the old rivalries? Well, you're still going to have, four non-conference games. You can use those games for rivalry games, which not only is good for the team from the Super League you're playing against, your old rival, but it also gives the old rival a chance to see how they stack up against a Super League quality team. So it's probably good for both, and also with extra non-district games, you can play out of state if you want to play, DeMatha or whatever. So it does give some flexibility of schedule. Now, the reason why three conferences, three classifications is more important than six is this: we got to create we got to create bigger districts because we're going to be moving teams up and maybe even down. So if you move teams up to a Super League, you don't want to have a five-team conference that's now four teams. But if it's nine or 10 or whatever, then it's not a big deal. You can work around the schedule. Now, the Super League is only going to apply to football. It's not going to apply to every sport. Maybe some sports need reform as well, but football is where the trouble issues are pressing. So Super League is just for football. We just with three conferences, we can also consider teams moving down. Let's say, for example, you have Lewis from Springfield and Justice from Falls Church. Those teams their demographic is very different than some of the teams they're going to play. It's hard to compete in football. It might make sense to move them down to the middle classification, what we used to call double A or even single A. Can you imagine if those teams can be competitive in the regular season? But by having three classifications and like a competition committee that makes decisions on moving teams up and down, I think you're going to add to the competition of not just the best teams, but all the teams. So, even if we have a Super League and you take the 16 best teams, we're still going to have a lot of blowouts just because there's so much disparity. So this moving teams up and down is very important. And again, having three classifications enables you to do that because you have plenty of teams in in districts that are left. So if you move one or two teams up or down, you may go from 9 to 7 or 10 to 8. And we're going to have more flexibility every year with schedules. Now with the Super League, and we're going to probably have to realign every 2 years or so. And you're going to have to apply. You're going to have move teams down. Maybe the last place team is move back down into the regular classifications. Every year. Maybe it's a 2-year appointment. Those are things you're going to have to really think hard about. But I do think it's important to get all the best teams into their own league and let them play. I think it's going to create great competition. It's going to probably create maybe some of the best conferences in the country because you're going to have all these great conferences in one league. Obviously, it's not quite Texas or Mississippi, but it's going to be really great competition. Maybe we'll keep some of the kids from private school from going to stay at the public schools. So I do think there's a lot of logistics to be worked out, and I know a lot of folks who are involved in the schools are going to listen to this and it's like, there's no way we can do this. But I think we have to think outside the box. We get to think of ways we can make our high school our football more competitive. Otherwise, I think we're going to lose players and programs over time. And just think how wonderful it would be if we have the 16-team conference of our really best teams, and they have to play during the season. We're going to have some big crowds and some thrilling games. So I like to see a system that moves towards that. Don't know if it's possible, but if you have thoughts, make sure you leave your comments below in the comment section. Thanks for listening.